7:30, April 21st, calling the meeting to order. And with that, to the mayor for the weather report, please.
Absolutely. The self-proclaimed, self-appointed mayor. Okay, as far as the weather goes, it's just gonna get better and better. Tomorrow's gonna be a stellar day, lots of sunshine, 75. Looks pretty much the same on Saturday. Sunday, it's gonna be a touch of summertime. Mid-80s, maybe upper 80s here, both Sunday and Monday, before it cools down considerably again next week. Going into the month of May, it looks like it's going to be a little cooler than normal, but that should start to change and turn around by the mid to the latter part of the month. And then I think we're going to get into some big time summer weather. We hope anyway.
All right. Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay.
Building administrator's report, please. Doug.
Yeah. I just asked him to unmute, so. Hang on one second. Hang on. Doug? Come on. There you go. Doug, can you unmute if you can hear me? There we go. Here it is.
Hello, you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. At 3506 Bradley Lane, the village issued a building permit on December 9th. The walls are going up now at 720 Delfield. The village issued demolition building permit on May 17th. The applicant said they do not need an extension on the permit. It looks almost complete. I'll contact the team to make sure. At 120 Quincy, the village issued a building permit on February 9th. Exterior work, it has begun on that project. And at 7200 Summit Avenue, the applicants have filed for a building permit. The county approved those plans on April 12th. We're reviewing the final plans now, and the building permit should be extended, it should be issued maybe sometime next week. And that's the project that had a variance for some additions on the front of the house. And that concludes my report.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay. Now we have an opportunity for resident comments. If you want to raise your hands or indicate electronically you want to speak.
Okay.
Okay.
Marty has.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm asking her to unmute.
Hi, everybody. I just want to start out by saying a big thank you for getting that first speed hump on Thornapple. It already seems to, at least to my observation, be slowing people down for the stop sign. I mean, they still roll through the stop sign, but they're not blowing through it like they used to. So I wanted to encourage you to move forward rapidly with the other two speed bumps on Thornapple, plus the other streets in the traffic engineer's report. And I did want to ask that the council consider adding speed humps on Turner, which I don't believe is one of the streets currently listed for them. But Andrew, I know this is near and dear to your heart, because there are a lot of people up and down Turner to get to the park, and sometimes speeding up and down Turner. And so I would ask the council consider adding Turner to the list of streets to get speed humps, hopefully very soon.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marty. And yes, it is near and dear to my heart, not only because I live there, but I see the speeds, and it's an unusual dead end because it does have a destination for non-residents. But I think the goal is here to implement what has been recommended by the task force. And I think as a next step, I would love for the traffic group, and I've had a conversation with Niles, and I want to have this conversation with the council as well, to look at the other streets in our neighborhood, because to me it's not volume, I mean, volume is important, of course, but it's a single driver that speeds and can injure or kill a child or a neighbor. That's what matters. So that's where the street hump, the street bumps, humps, whatever you want to call them, will make a big difference. So thank you, Marty. I saw Holly either clapping or wanting to raise her hand, but maybe we'll start with Naomi. I see her hand up.
Yep, I'm asking you to unmute. So
Sorry, Holly. If you want to speak,
just
clap again or raise your hand.
it should. Hang on one second. Let me ask you to unmute again, Naomi, and it should pop up with a little pop up. There we go.
Okay, hi everyone. So having served on the safety committee and having done an extensive survey of all the residents, rising to the top was the issue of snow shoveling of the sidewalks. I would like to urge the council to make this a priority, now that we have some time between now and the next winter, to do a financial analysis of what it would cost to help people who are requesting because of age or disability, or even, by the way, being away for the winter. We don't want sidewalks unshoveled, even in one street, in front of one house on a block. Otherwise, people cannot safely walk. So I would really request that you all ask Niles to do an analysis of what it would cost to help people who are in need and to help people who cannot, for any other reason, shovel. On an hourly basis, maybe we can hire some of the youngsters at minimum wage. Maybe we can get a vendor to do it. And also do an analysis of what it would cost to do the whole village. We have a lot of money, and I would like to know how much it would cost to cover both alternatives. Those who request and or need, and those for the whole village. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I was going to
Okay,
ask
yeah.
Arthur to speak up.
Naomi, we actually have in this year's budget, which is before us tonight and will be voted on next month, an item to do exactly that, to shovel snow for those who request it. It's not a general one. So it is in the budget, and we are going forward with it, if it's accepted.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Holly.
I'm asking her to unmute right now. So just
Fine.
there we go.
Okay. Okay, it wouldn't let me. Sorry. I can see why it wouldn't let me. I can see why you wouldn't let me. I was clapping instead of raising my hand. Sorry. I just wanted to. Hi, everybody. I just want to say that I would have loved to see the election materials go out before the candidate forum, because it had information on the candidate forum, and I think mailing is one of the most effective ways to get engagement in our community, and I know it's expensive, but I would have loved to have seen that. I'm not trying to give anyone a hard time. I just want to say I think getting the engagement for voting and participation in the election in our community is really important, and I would have loved to have seen something about the candidate form go out in mail. If you're going to mail it anyway, I would love to see it go out in time, more timely fashion. Sorry if I'm hurting anyone's feelings, I apologize. That wasn't my intent. I just think mail matters. Bye. Sorry.
No, thank you, Holly. And I know that we've sent them out electronically, and I did recognize, because I was traveling over the weekend, that I only received it after the mailer.
So
But I don't know if that was the case for everyone, or...
So that's the case because there's a scheduling question here, and I think this is a good example of how do we set up the election season. So we put in for having the mailing sent the day after you received it electronically. It takes a few days for our vendor who's doing this mass mailing to look at everything, proof it over, and then mail it out, right? So because of when the forum was, which was literally a week after the candidate statements went out, that becomes this question of how can we time it all out if everything is happening right off the bat,
Right.
right? So I think in the lesson for the village is how we sort of space these things out and how we think about them going forward.
Okay.
But I think that's a valid
Yeah.
question.
Well, lesson learned, and we'll improve upon
But
this.
there was another issue that had come up about whether you should have the ballots on your table during the candidates forum. There are some people who argued you should not do that. You should wait till the candidates forum, then you get the ballots. Or then the other one was you should have them right there. You listen to people, you fill in the ballot,
Yeah.
and you send it off. So I'm not sure what Holly's point was, but there was a debate about this, about the timing. Forum, then you get the ballots, then you have the
Yeah.
forum.
Well, hers was just the candidate statements and the information on the candidates to have
The
that
information.
via mail before the actual forum. And that, of course, leads to the other issue, and that is that we've heard from some residents, and I haven't myself received ballots yet. So it's been over a week.
Right.
Since,
We have
yeah.
not received
yeah.
it.
So,
No, and that I can speak to as well. So right now, the ballots, I've been trying to work with our vendor to get the ballots out as quickly as possible. The ballots, I was told is to get them out this week, the middle of this week. They told me, they said on Tuesday it would be this week. Today they said it will be tomorrow that they'll be put in the mail, or Monday.
Okay.
So right now I'm trying to push and push and push to get them out tomorrow. The two things that they are working on right now to make sure that it is absolutely correct. First of all, they have also gone with a new contractor for the printer, so that's part of it, who are, I think, more precise in how they do things. So right now, the last two touches are making sure that all the control numbers are correct and making sure that the tracking both in and out of the village is on ballot. Now, with all that being said, the ballots have to be returned to the vendor by May 23rd. So there is a month
Yeah.
for people to get them back.
Right.
That being said, I think one of the things, again, going to timing, and this is just a sort of a general thing, is when you have, like, the committee reviewed the voter roll, the ballots, and all of those type of things going up to it, is when you have the forum first, the committee has a lot of work with the forum, and then having them approve things, and then having that process. So one of the lessons learned, I think, is how we space all of these things out matters. And so the order of those things are something that I think we can look at going forward.
well, we've certainly accomplished the no ballots before the forum
Yes.
recommendation in the election plan.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, but I'm doing that. You had
Holly,
something
follow up.
else?
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Holly. You're unmuted.
I just, I'm not sure if that was Arthur, I couldn't tell who was talking, asking, they weren't sure what my point was, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. My point was that if you're gonna send out something, that invites people to the candidates forum, it's good if that goes out before the forum, or it has occurred, because
Right.
it came way in.
Okay.
That was my point.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Holly. Okay, moving on. I don't see any more hands. Committee updates. So, do we want to start with community engagement? If you want to give us an update, Keith, if there's anything.
Well, good evening, everyone. Keith Allen with the Community Engagement Committee. And if you just give me a moment here, I might have to have Niles help me hold this up. I've introduced myself to some of the new residents, and I asked a couple of them to come up here. I was hoping they'd be here this evening so I could present them to everyone, but they're a no-show. Your people are busy. They've got different things going on. Some of them have kids, but in particular, I wanted to, I've got a couple of names here on, so a young couple moved into 7212 Chestnut Street, and their names are Ibrahim Al-Khalaf and his wife or significant other, Yasmin Abdul Faleb. And they're away, they're out of town right now, but they said that they would come up next month. And then on Turner, there's Matt and Jordan Cantor that live across the street from Andrew at 3503. And I want to get them up here too. And then a new couple that lives right down from you on the same side, Andrew. I don't know their last name. They're up in the Stoddard's house, 3500.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Tim Powers and I want to say it's Jessica.
Cornelia, or
Yeah,
I think it's
Right.
Cornelia.
Cornelia. Yep.
Sounds like.
Yes.
So I've
Yeah.
gone to them and introduced myself and told them I would very much like to have them come up here to meet the council and everyone else. Okay, the other thing is that I wanted to give some kudos out to Katie's daughter and the young man, the son of
Oh, the
Khan's, Oliver Kahn,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
they did an outstanding job with the stories of people that have been in the community here for decades. I'm sure you read that. That was just great. So kudos to them, to both of them. We need
Yeah.
more of those stories, Katie.
Yes, I'm gonna do a pitch at the end. Thank you.
You're welcome. I also had the gas company. There was some issues with people smelling the odor of gas in the community here. I've had all of that checked out. I coordinated that with Niles, and all is well as far as that's concerned. They've been doing some work here that might have had something to do with the odor of gas. Sewer gas could have been the culprit, but nothing that we have to be concerned about.
And they did some testing as well on places like Taylor Street and elsewhere to make sure. So that's where we stand right now.
Great.
Okay.
So, a quick question there. So the gas smells that people say they're smelling could be sewer gas, not,
It could-
not
right,
the
it could be.
burnable natural gas.
Yeah, it's but everything that I've been told and everything that they said, if you smell something, report
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And report it to Washington Gas, and they will figure out whether it's a thing or not.
Right away.
So that's the
Yeah.
first line of defense. If you smell something, sort of like to see something, say something. You
Right.
just
If you smell something, say
Yeah.
something.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Call someone.
See who- no,
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, the street captains, we've got most of them all lined up, and they're fired up and ready to go.
We had one today come in and pick up a welcome bag, so there's a few more that are coming in to do some work. So
I'd like to say who those people are. On Brookville Road, Paul McGowan, who's a member of our committee here. On Chestnut Street, Marty Langland. Dellfield Dead End is Lauren Beals. On Melville, Oliver Wolf. On Oxford Street and Quincy Street, Lynn Welly. I don't know if Lynn's here with us tonight or not, but this was a big project of his that he had been highly touting, as was to get street captains together. On Shepherd Street, Sally Van Tassel. Taylor is Katie's dear husband, Steve. On Thornapple, Barbara Singer. And on Turner, my next door neighbor, Elizabeth Boland. And we're reaching out to Tessa Harbor, to do Bradley.
yeah, and she is already she's one of the ones that's going to pick up some welcome
Thank you,
bags.
thank you.
Mhm.
And Denise and Peter Glassman on Cummings, Rick Hellings, Delfield Street, Lisa Single on Raymond, and Lauren Bramlett on Summit. And having street captains is a great thing, because they can help in so many ways. If there anything that is amiss that they see, they can report that. They can look out for the elderly. There's a lot of good that can come out of having street captains. And so that's something that we're really excited about right now. We're also excited about, and Niles can talk about that next month with the elections here on the street.
So, on the spring, so Keith and I had a conversation about whether the election committee is just going to have a table to where people can drop off their ballots, and so Keith and I were discussing whether we want to do something at the same time. Another resident had suggested us doing an ice cream truck at some point, and I think somebody else did as well. So maybe something a little bit small. The shop downstairs has expressed interest in doing events in general. And so we can we can see if we can get that worked out. But I'm looking through a couple of different options, and we'll talk about that more later.
And of course, our event in the summer, the 4th of July picnic, we're gonna have a meeting, I'd like to call for a meeting next month,
Yep.
and we're gonna discuss that. So we're moving forward with a lot of good things, a lot of good ideas. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the engagement committee and to let you know about what we're doing here this evening. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Okay. Lori, I know we have an item here, but I think separate from what we're going to be discussing next, is there any committee update?
I do have a quick update.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. Just because we've been working administratively, so for transparency, I want to keep everyone in the loop here. Following up on the ethics committee report from the last council meeting, the committee has now reviewed all conflict of interest questionnaires and oath of office forms filed this fiscal year. While there were no reported conflicts of interest, the review identified several glitches that Niles has kindly helped to address. To improve the process in the future, the committee will be developing an SOP and redesigning the conflict of interest questionnaire, which I hope to have a copy of at the next council meeting for your review. We're not really thinking about making any substantive changes. It's more design-based, looking at what questions people skipped and some questions that didn't really make sense the way they were written. The committee's also begun work on its year-end report, which will include metrics on the number of complaints received year to date. I'm pleased to report that the committee has received no ethics complaints during this term, similar to last year, when the impartiality ordinance was in the public spotlight. This year and last year stand in contrast to 2020, when the committee and council received multiple ethics complaints. These trends are consistent with ethics research, which correlates well-defined ethics laws and heightened ethics awareness to a reduction in the number of ethics complaints. Hopefully this information will eliminate any resident concern that the passage of the impartiality ordinance would increase the number of ethics complaints received. Additional information about the Ethics Committee and a copy of the minutes from our meetings can be found on the ethics page of the village website. And residents are also encouraged to attend the next meeting, which is scheduled for next Tuesday, April 26th at 7 p.m.
Great. Thank you. George, if you have any updates from the election committee?
Thanks, Andrew. I think Niles covered a lot of it with the updates from the vendor relating to when the ballots are going out. You'll get official confirmation from that everyone in the village. We've got some messaging prepared that as soon as we have confirmation from the vendor that they have actually put everything in the mail, we will send out an email so that everyone will have a chance to, or we'll get an email notifying them that those are in the mail to be on the lookout for them. If anyone either runs into or anticipates an issue with getting their ballot in due to timing of we're going out of town, etc., where we might need it sent to a different location, please reach out to the committee. We're happy to work with people and come up with a reasonable solution that can get you the ballot so that you can either get it mailed back in time or potentially come for the drop it off in person on May 10th from 5 to 8 p.m. When we'll have the drop box available for collecting all of the ballots. And I'd add, additionally, thank you again to everyone who sent in a question, who dialed in, participated in the candidate forum. We had excellent participation in that, and I know everyone on the committee was very pleased to see that. We have our next election committee meeting is next week. The big thing on our agenda for that is to cover the vote counting procedures and any updates that are needed from last year's vote counting procedures to address for the vote counting procedures this year. And so that's on the agenda for next week. And then the other one, just flagging, I know it was kind of touched on earlier that Niles had brought up some of the issues around the timing and some things like that. We're in the process for the committee this year of capturing, throughout this process of capturing some lessons learned. And I'm sure we're gonna have a standalone lessons learned session after the vote counting is all completed before the end of the year, so we can make sure we're capturing and memorializing any of that. So if people are having feedback on timing, like the helpful feedback that Holly had earlier, we're capturing all of that, and we'll work to incorporate that into recommendations for the committee next year.
Great. Thank you, George. And I want to express my gratitude to the election committee as the liaison and what I witnessed with a couple that's traveling overseas and that requested to receive ballots a little earlier and or was hoping that they would receive the ballots on time here or, before their departure. And the election committee really bent over backwards with Niles' insistence in getting those ballots to said residents. So thank you very much for making that happen. I don't know if Naomi, if your hand is still up from earlier, if you have a quick comment, and then Marty, a quick comment before we move on.
Yes, I want to say something about having a party or celebration on the sidewalk. I really encourage you to think about doing that after the election so we can celebrate the new council members, because encouraging people to come when we are processing ballots is only inviting people not to use the mail, and also overwhelming the two people from the committee who are going to serve there. I do not encourage you to have a party on the night of the final ballot submissions in front of our office, but rather to delay it so that we can celebrate together the new council members.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Okay. Marty?
I'm asking her to unmute, so.
Two things. One, just responding to Naomi. Having served at the election table for many a year, I tend to agree with Naomi. Have the party afterwards. It is quite demanding to serve the election table and make sure you get all the details right. And I commend the election committee, as you said it, Andrew, for helping those two residents get their ballots in the mail early, because otherwise they would have lost their right to vote. So I think the committee's really on top of it, and I don't think the committee should make its life harder. It's difficult enough to get everything on the election stuff right. So I think Naomi's got a good point there. The question I had for the election committee was, normally we would put out an announcement, usually several, like right in this period here, about how residents can add their names to the voter roll. Not just for new people, but people have children who turned 18, or maybe grandpa or grandma moved in and they're now a resident. And I wanted to ask George about the committee's plans for public notices on contact to go out to say, how people could do that, and not just, that they have to do it by May 10th, but how to do it in the meantime to encourage people to get themselves add themselves to the voter roll now, so that you're not overwhelmed at the table on May 10th with last minute requests from voters who want to vote. I mean, we have a very active voting community, and that's great. So George, what's the plan for announcements to go out about how people can make sure they're on the voter roll, or add an 18-year-old kid, or whatever?
George?
So I can say some of that information has already been included in a lot of the messaging that's been going out. It's in language related to the election plan. It's on the election website. The other one, as per our communications calendar that the committee discussed, there is additional messaging that is planned to go out after the ballots are out that will help remind people, because the ballots going out serves as a helpful forcing function for people who may have ballots that have arrived for some members of their household but not others, and that provides a good forcing function for people to realize that they may not be on the voter roll. And so that's part of the messaging for things going out as soon as the ballots have been mailed, to make people aware that they should be receiving a ballot if they haven't, to make sure that they are aware of reaching out to the village office to make sure that they have the opportunity to be added to the voter roll in advance of any of the deadlines.
And so I think
that's
that
all captured in our communications plan, and is already scheduled that we'll have some of that going out. It's just been held up a little bit while we've been, working with the vendor, trying to make sure everything gets squared away before the ballots actually drop in the mail.
And this is great. Thank you, George. And this can all be amplified by neighbors that are meeting new neighbors and the street captains. I mean, there's a way we can also do that on the outside, so outside of the committee process, but I appreciate everything the committee is doing. Okay,
And,
Yeah.
sorry, Andrew, the last one, just as the last reminder for everyone, I know Niles mentioned it, but we're gonna keep saying it, so we will have the drop box on May 10th. The other one is ballots have to, if they're in the mail, they have to be to the vendor by evening of May 23rd is the deadline for that. So just reminding everyone that is, if you're dropping it in the mail, the deadline is May 23rd. So even if you missed the chance to come drop it off in person on May 10th, you can still get it in the mail, and try and get it to the vendors no later than the 23rd, to be captured and counted.
great. Awesome. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Okay, so now on to a discussion of the possible introduction of an ordinance. The Ethics Committee recommendations to go to staggered terms for the Ethics Committee. Our counsel, Ron Bolt, put together a draft, and this is the opportunity for us to have this conversation and to introduce this new ordinance. Anyone want to speak on this? I don't know if we've heard Lori discuss this in previous meetings. I don't know if Lori, if there's anything else you'd like to say on this before we open it up, or have a council member speak on this again.
I really don't have anything additional to say. I did read, what Ron had written, and my only question was, that he says it's going to be a minimum of 3 people, and in the first year, you can appoint members to one year or 2-year terms. So I would just question if the number changes, if that language still works.
He did include a clause, or to maintain staggering after a vacancy, so that would take care of it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I'm trying to pull it up right now.
Sorry,
Yeah, I
didn't see
have
that earlier.
one comment on it. I think the language does what we wanted to do. It does what the Ethics Committee suggested. In terms of the process that we had discussed earlier, and I'm sure will come up on the next item, of putting out a statement of why we are doing ordinances, what are the arguments for and against, and so on. We do not have a formal one for this. And I'm wondering if we are actually going to have this as a standard procedure of every ordinance have an accompanying statement of why do we want an ordinance, what's the problem it's trying to solve, what are the arguments for it and against it. How do we do that procedurally? Should every ordinance have assigned to it a council member who is responsible for introducing it and producing this document, this kind of explanation document? Do we really want to do it for every ordinance? Is it something that we should drop? So it's a question I have in general about the introduction of ordinances, and the suggestion that we've made earlier that Jeff and I have both pushed about having an explanation for it and so on. This does not have one. How should we procedurally move on
Now,
that?
you didn't think the Venn diagram provided some explanation as to what the benefits were?
Right.
What
No, but
It
my
was
question is
completely-
whether it should be a formal part of the ordinance introduction process.
Like how we came about to this
Yeah,
this
right.
point
Should
in
there
this-
be a formal statement accompanying every ordinance that says that?
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
I
I-
can also answer that to some degree, because it did come up initially in one of our meetings, and our committee voted to seek guidance from the council before we even discussed the ordinance, or the recommendation at a committee meeting. We came back, we spoke to the council suggested
Right.
yes, that would be good, something for the committee to discuss. We, in our committee meetings, advertised it on our agendas, we discussed the pros and cons, we had a formal vote, and then we did come back to the council
Right,
with the
right,
formal
right.
vote.
Yeah.
And a summary of what we
So,
got.
so one question is, does that process satisfy the requirement that we had discussed earlier? Or should there be a different procedure.
I guess the question is, do we need, as part of non-binding guidelines,
Right, yeah,
a process where residents feel they're not ambushed by an
Yeah.
ordinance that's suddenly
Right.
being introduced
Right.
without all the extensive work that was done at
Right,
the committee level,
right.
then discussions in the council,
Right.
a drafting process, and then the formal introduction.
Right.
But I
Um,
think
It
that
was
depends.
advertised in our agenda.
Right, but
I
that's what I'm
was gonna
saying. I
say,
mean, you went.
I will say that Katie has shepherded it by, sharing
Yep.
the information.
So
Yeah,
what
I
was that?
was just gonna say, it depends on your definition of ambushed, because if it's been discussed at many meetings, it's been discussed in the committee meeting,
Yep.
it's been discussed in a couple of council meetings now, you can't really claim to be ambushed.
Right,
Yeah.
no, absolutely,
I
100%.
think it's full disclosure, it's
Yeah,
really
right.
Yeah.
very.
So the question is, how do you guarantee that what was done without any guidelines and was done, in full transparency and redundancy, repeated conversations and over the course of a couple of months, do we need
Right, do we need that?
something
Right.
that provides that
Right.
kind of process, various
Right.
steps that lead
Yeah.
up to this?
Yeah.
And Jeff, you might have a comment on that.
It's so, we're here in person, I'm used to raising my hand on Zoom. I'm actually raising
You
my
are,
hand.
unmute yourself.
Exactly. The only thing I mean, there's been extraordinary work. The Venn diagram was on my mind. I was just gonna say, I think in this particular case, perhaps the one step that could have happened was a little cover of maybe 3 to 4 sentences that just summarize, so like a cover note to the ordinance, perhaps. I think in this case, knowing, I'm just putting out there, the preponderance of effort that we all know about and through the series of meetings, the question is, are we really gonna delay this introduction? And I think we all are
No.
saying no,
No.
but I would say perhaps going forward, when you do something like this, we could have a little cover that's maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 sentences that just
That
summarizes.
rehashes how we got
Exactly.
to this spot.
Exactly, and
I mean,
And
can
then
refer
for the-
to prior information.
Yeah,
in
and
the
the minutes and things like that. We
Right.
say it was
Okay.
discussed
Right.
at these
And, and
meetings.
serving as liaison to the committee, I mean, I've been updated and
Yeah, right.
informing you all. I mean, I don't think it's really been done, so it's a good experiment to
Yeah.
start with, and I think it causes benefits for, institutional knowledge and retention, and that's sort of how it's framed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Which we know has been a problem on
well, but in-
committees, so.
in last month's meeting, we had introduced an ordinance to allow the property tax to remain as it was. Does that kind of an ordinance proposal require a statement?
Well, so
I mean, do we have a policy on this?
can I
Yeah, go ahead.
intersect here just
Yeah.
because I was looking over some stuff with the charter and the code. If we were changing the property tax, there is already a procedure that we have to follow. So we'd have to let everybody know, we'd have to explain what we were doing, all of that stuff. I think part of this question, I think, is down to how do you want to deal with various things. We have to, by state law, do the budget as an ordinance. We have to, by state law, do the tax rate as it. So in that sense, people are already aware of this process. If you look back on our website, we have everyone that was introduced and everyone that was adopted going back years, right? So in that sense, we have certain things like that. There already is a process. So the question is, when we have new things, if it comes from the committee, then there can be a committee process. If there are other things, the main thing that comes to mind is changes to the building code or things like that that tend to be more generated from the experience that the office has. Then you can say, well, that's a part where the office has to state this is the recommendation of the office to fix the building code because of our experience in administering it. Taking an example, I'm just taking an example. So I think it also depends on where it's coming from. So we have some procedures for very specific things, like the budget, and it's more about other things.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, generally speaking, if something comes that is not procedurally a given, an annual, rite of passage, for lack of a different expression, then maybe it would make sense to have a cover note with this draft upon introduction, just so when we post it, because we have 14, 15 people here, for folks that actually go to the website, they can look, this is why we're actually introducing this. This came up originally in an ethics committee meeting. We did some discussions with the council, and then we got to this spot.
Right.
So, okay.
So what I'm hearing then is that we do not need a very specific set of procedures written out on having a explanation for every ordinance that comes before us. That it's kind of sui generis, that every case comes up in a different format and from a different direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
Good.
in this instance.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
All right. So before we proceed here, I see. Oh, did you have something else, Lori? No. Okay. I don't see your facial expression, so I'm just trying to. We have a raised hand, Marty.
Yes, thanks, hi. Two questions, two thoughts. One is, I do think it's good to have at least a cover note from a council member saying why you're doing X, Y, Z, even for the routine stuff. You know, more people will pay attention if they get a little bit more information, one hopes. And it doesn't have to be long. Something obvious like the budget or the tax rate, where it doesn't even change, 2 sentences would do it. And I think that we had a lot of discussion about this change in the ethics terms, and that was well discussed, but still a cover note wouldn't hurt. And it's good to have that kind of standard procedural step in there, just to make sure that nobody skips it when it does matter. The question I had about the proposal tonight is, the council has the authority, full authority, to appoint or remove volunteers on any committee at any time, and I think that's an important authority. If a volunteer is appointed to a 2-year term on the ethics committee, on the election committee, the election committee last year, 2021, was the first time in decades that the election committee didn't have continuity. Normally we have people serve for multiple years, and the old timers, have a couple new people come on and you train them. Exactly the same argument that Lori's made here on the ethics committee. I think it's equally important to vote to have some experienced hands, in the group from one year to the next. The question I have is, what does that do? And this may be a question. What does that do to limit the council's authority to appoint people in July every year? If somebody is appointed to a 2-year term, does that tie the council's hands? That they can't appoint other people, or that or I'm not saying somebody could be removed for cause, but people can be removed without cause. That's happened. What's the deal in terms of what takes, what preempts what? Does the council's authority to appoint or remove people preempt the 2-year term appointment? Or does the 2-year term prevent the council from taking such an action?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I think that from removing a committee member was, and your point was discussed as when we were discussing the pluses and minuses of this last meeting. One of the minuses, it takes away from the council every year from appointing. They are saddled with at least one member from the previous year. And that was recognized as an issue, and we said, okay, that's something we're willing to live with. It does not take away the ability to remove a committee member if that should arise.
Right, and these aren't political appointments.
Right.
We're not a 2-party or 3-party system here where we have our Democratic or Republican appointees. But you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that it wasn't presented as a negative, it was presented in a neutral position. That some people may feel it's a negative, other people, like what Andrew said, that it's, there is a benefit in terms of an ethics committee serving for multiple terms, not necessarily just for the people who have appointed them. And that's a pretty standard practice for ethics bodies.
And removal would require a majority vote by the council, right? So
But
it's
I don't think it would be affected whether it's a 1-year term or a 2-year term. I think that the council still would retain their oversight over any committee member.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, that answers my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marty. Okay, council colleagues, any other comments on this before I ask someone to move?
I will move.
Okay. To introduce?
To introduce, yeah.
Susan
To
moves, to
introduce.
introduce.
I will
Do we have
second.
a second? Arthur seconds. All the ayes?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. I was instructed, for the record, that I say the name of the person that moves
Oh,
and the
And the
name of
person
the
who's
person
introduced.
that seconds.
Yeah,
I've been
Transcribing, it's
just for
hard.
when
Yeah.
transcribing, it's clearer, especially when on Zoom, especially you have multiple people doing it and nobody's here, so it's sometimes harder.
I've been lectured before the meeting today.
I
Not
wanna-
a
Clearly
lecture,
very
a
effective.
reminder.
It worked. It worked.
For the record, I was going back through my own notes to look at some meetings, minutes from previous meetings that I somehow did not have on my computer. I went to the village website, and there are minutes there for every meeting, almost, since 2002, which I downloaded and put into one file, and then just started scanning through them, refreshing my memory that of the village history. I encourage anyone to do that. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be looking for minutes you don't have yourself, it's there on the website.
I will be doing that every night between bedtime
Right.
and when I pass
It
out.
did take 22 minutes
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
Can I just say though, let's
Good
shout out to Martha, who did a lot of the work of finding old things
Yeah.
for from 2002, 2003, and such, because we had pretty good for a good chunk of years.
Yeah.
But she scoured everything that we had on file here in the office and found things. So
And one of the things, one of the questions we get, how come we're spending so much money on an office and on furniture and all this stuff? You go back and look at the old meetings, there were people met in people's homes,
yep.
in rented rooms up at Chevy Chase Lake, a real estate office that was in this building here, at the Chevy Chase Village City Hall, wherever they could scrounge up room. There was not a presence that the village had where people could come in, where contractors could come in.
Upstairs at La Ferme.
And La Ferme.
Yeah.
You go through meeting by meeting, and you see just the disparate places where meetings were held. I don't think we want to go back to that situation.
Yeah.
Niles doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
Okay,
Moving on.
all right.
That's good.
Andrew, just one quick point I
Yeah.
think that was raised that's a good one is, this applies to ethics, but there's a possibility we could look into it for something like the elections committee. But the ethics committee did all the work, I think, a lot of good diligence. It's very possible we may look at it for other.
Oh, for staggered terms?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
we're focusing on the ethics.
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I will say that we did discuss the election committee, but our committee members as a whole felt like it wasn't our place to
Yeah.
recommend it for another committee.
Good.
So,
Okay. No, no
Yeah.
hostile takeover of the election committee by the ethics committee.
Good. Thank you.
Got it.
That's a useful point.
Lori and the committee
Smart
did
move.
all the homework.
Very ethical of you. Okay, next the discussion on the guidelines for committees. So we're at a point where we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community and from council members, and we have a draft that is ready for introduction tonight. So if anyone would like to comment on any items, and just by way of reference, the clock starts ticking here for a 30-day period for additional review and comments prior to us taking it up at the next council meeting for passage. I see a hand raised. Marty, please.
Yes, thanks again.
Yeah. I'll let you-
On the ordinance process, I think one of the things that caused tension about the ethics bias ordinance was that the council seemed to make a decision to go ahead and have Ron draft that and the sign ordinance too, actually, at the same time, without having had a public discussion. And it wasn't clear to me, Arthur, in the guidelines here, that you do talk about the ordinance process somewhat, and I appreciate that very much. But it does seem like there ought to be something in writing in our general non-binding guidelines that says that before the council makes a decision to have our attorney draft an ordinance, that there ought to be some kind of public discussion about that. And I don't know if this set of guidelines is really the place for it, but could you address that a little bit? Because again, you're talking about people feeling blindsided or ambushed. And it seems to me you can prevent that negative feeling by saying, having the council, whichever council members think an ordinance on X, Y, Z is a good idea, to say up front publicly, we are considering a sign ordinance, for example. so that it doesn't kind of come out of the blue to the community. Is this the place for that, Arthur, or would
Well-
that be somewhere else?
Well, I would say that the process that we have in place right now gives 30 days of discussion period, at least, for new ordinances. This has been the question of, do we submit in advance a document that says, here's what we're going to do? We could still do that, and that day say, council, write this up. But I think there's built into the procedures, written into the charter and the code, that we do have this period of time for review. We don't, unless it's an emergency, we don't introduce and adopt something at one go. There's at least one and often more 2 meetings before, 2 months before doing it. I see you're shaking your head.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would-
that's
I would-
just the
And that's all
process.
good.
That's always
That's
been the
really excellent.
procedure.
My question is that before you make a decision to spend public funds on having an attorney draft a document, an ordinance like sign ordinance, because that was, simpler. Should there be a public discussion by the council before you actually make the decision to spend public funds on drafting it?
Jeff, you were going to say something?
I was just gonna say, well, first of all, this and it's, I think it's a very germane point, but this document is focused on committees, and there is in the appendix, if we look at, I know not many people look at supplemental appendix, but in supplemental appendix under policy or ordinance, point B actually provides council vote for initiating a request by the committee to undertake ordinance development and directs council to help prepare a draft ordinance. So we do have somewhat codified, I think addresses the point that you're making, but this is for committees. So if it's outside of the committee purview, we don't necessarily have this written if it's an ordinance beyond the committee. But we did
Right.
address that in this particular document in the context of committees itself, Marty. So, whether or not we take that up as a point that's a more general point, I think it's a discussion, but maybe not one for today. Only because we're focused so much on the committee piece itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff, that's helpful, thank you.
Arthur, anything else?
Yeah, I want to thank so many people for providing input and recommendations for this document. I started drafting it by simply going around and looking what other communities had done and cutting and pasting some stuff together. And a lot of people added, a lot of people took out. A number of residents suggested some very useful re-editing of the whole thing. And I think that's how we got to where we are. So I kind of did it, but with the help of everybody. I do have a question about the very thing that Jeff just mentioned. In a somewhat earlier draft, the last draft but one, I raised a number of questions about whether some issues should remain in the guidelines themselves. Jeff did I think it was you're doing a great idea of putting it into a supplement. It kind of takes out some of the not boilerplate, but very detailed stuff and puts it into a supplement. I'm still wondering whether we need it though. And the 2 items have to deal with the policy ordinance development. As I read through the 6 points labeled A to F, about 4 of them deal with the council procedures rather than committee procedures. And it's exactly what we've been talking about. What are the procedures, if any, that the council should follow? A little bit of that refers to what committees should do. And I would argue that it's already in the draft that this is the way committees operate. They hold open meetings, they get feedback from the community, they provide reports after majority approval to the council. So I question whether the supplemental procedure policy of ordinance development is needed. And then the email procedures also was suggested originally by a resident with a lot of experience on committees who had operated under these procedures. I'm wondering whether these have to be written down here as well. So I will ask my council members to consider both those points and perhaps take a vote on whether one or both of those can be eliminated in the supplemental procedure.
Are we just starting with both of those? Or
I would
discuss
suggest-
for also whether we think it's even necessary?
Uh,
Because I would be happy to just jump
To-
right into that one.
to both the,
Any of
both,
And
both
the
of these.
guidelines. I
Oh, the
actually-
guidelines as a whole.
I actually, when you contemplated drawing up
Yeah.
guidelines, thought you were thinking of doing something simpler, the ones that you alluded to that other jurisdictions
Right.
have. That's kind of all we need. We talk about how bureaucratic the council is,
Yeah,
how the
right,
village is
right.
way too top-down. This is like the epitome of top-down bureaucracy. I think we're gonna have a hard time finding residents who wanna serve on committees if they have to look at all this.
Right.
And it doesn't even cover some of the things that are really most problematic about committees.
Well, this is.
But the point of
Yeah,
this
right.
is not, this is non-binding, this is
I
to help
understand it's
committees.
not binding and it's meant to just enlighten them if they.
Yeah.
never
Yeah,
served on-
in fact,
I
yeah,
understand,
exactly.
but-
It's something
but
to
it's-
go to.
Guide them.
I know, but,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, this is
we
what
talk
happens
about
when
how-
people start adding things in. You start
Yeah,
getting.
I
yeah.
know. It was very simple. I looked at some, I think it was Chevy Chase Village maybe that had, or town, that had really streamlined and very simple, very coherent. And I mean, you've done a ton of work and you've done great work, but I just don't really think we need it. And I also think that a lot could be solved just by saying the call for volunteers should include a clear set of expectations for service on a committee, including regular attendance on those committees, willingness to prepare meeting minutes on a rotating basis, which has been problematic with many committees, and participate in the work of the committee.
I mean, look, I think this is I know it's gotten bigger than it originally was meant to be, but I think it's still a good cheat sheet in many ways, especially for new residents that want to get involved with committees. You know, we talked about standing up committees within a certain period of time because there was a great deal of unhappiness about how long it took to get the election committee going, things like that. And again, maybe there's a way of describing this and making clear that these guidelines are meant to assist and it's not an enforcement mechanism here. That if you don't follow this, you're running afoul with the law here in the Village of Martin's Edition. So I mean, in that sense, I think it's
Completely discretionary, non-binding, helpful guidelines.
yes, 100%. And if
So-
we
so-
want to add, but I mean, look,
So-
I know you're
I
being
understand.
sarcastic,
Yeah.
but never.
Who wants to take a stab at? Do you want to take a stab at editing it? Saying that?
Well, I mean, if I were to edit it, it would
Yeah.
end up
Yeah.
very short.
Yeah. What do you say?
Jeff?
I just want to take a step back. First
Yeah,
of all,
right.
Arthur and what others have said is that this has been a process
Yeah. Right.
of, first of all, this is years in the making, as we know. Also,
How
I
many
think that there has been a deliberative process of where we had a community forum, we've had many people provide input. I think we recognize this is a living, breathing document. And I think the other way of looking at this is I think it does address actually a lot of things that have been problems. So for example, even this year with the flare up around the role of the council liaison and having things introduced where we had some kerfluffle. And then I think, as was just brought up earlier, where we have something that outlines what is a process of how an ordinance development begins with a committee, which was also a point of kerfluffle last year. So I think that this goes a long way of putting some things down on paper that folks have been wanting to have as part of some operational understanding of how folks, what they're expected. And, you know, with that said, I will say, yeah, it's not perfect. Like, for example, I think in meetings, there's a thing about Robert's Rules of Order. I think even Ron had mentioned, you know,
Right.
in
We
some
don't really
comments, it's a
follow.
little bit anniquated, and we may not want to
Right.
get to that level of
In some
specificity.
respects, not
Right.
entirely.
But
Yeah,
in
yeah.
general, again, I'm just putting out there,
Right.
I'm a big fan of, you know, no bureaucracy or as little as possible, but I think knowing that there's been so many people involved in this, and they've put a lot of input into it. I don't think that this is the case of just getting rid of it. I think there's been a process now. I think this has been on the table for a month. Every council member has had an opportunity to put red lines and comments, and now the idea is being introduced. The community, council members can all continue to redline.
Yeah.
And again, I think if we need to streamline further, which I'm very much open to, great. Like, for example, the supplements I'll just address. I am agnostic whether it's part of this or elsewhere. The only thing I would suggest, if it's not in this, these I think are helpful, and then maybe Niles finds a place where he sticks it up on the website or somewhere, just so that we know it's there, so folks can reference it if they want.
Yeah.
But I think there's all sorts of good workarounds.
I think a couple of things speak in favor of something like these guidelines, and that is, one, we do have residents that want to get involved, but are a little intimidated because they don't know the process and might just not want to step up because it can be complicated and it can be intimidating. The other thing is, there's often this talk about, you need to appoint folks to committees that have experience, and those that don't have experience should not be considered the same as those with experience.
Right.
And I generally have a problem with that because it's a catch-22.
Right.
If you don't have the experience,
Yeah.
you'll never get it if you don't have that opportunity. And having guidelines at least helps you feel a little more comfortable in the procedural process, or what is expected of you as
Right.
you engage
Right.
for the first time possibly in village committees. So I think it's worth introducing this today. We have a month to tweak again, as we had in the past month. And then we can have a final vote if people feel like next month that this is just superfluous and not needed. So be it. But I do think it
Okay.
serves a purpose.
Good. Well, one of the things that pushed me to start doing it, first of all, we had a number of resident comments suggesting it. Second was that in liaison to committees, at the first meeting or two, they kind of sat around and said, what do we do next? And there wasn't a kind of institutional memory or institutional history that helped them get going. And I think what I was thinking at the time is something like this could do that, could serve as that institutional memory. Well, Lori, you're an inveterate committee member. You've been on at least 3 that I know of, possibly more. What do you think?
No pressure.
No, what I think would actually be, I think some of this is helpful. I think that much here, that it might be intimidating. I think that what would be more helpful would be to have SOPs for each committee, so that volunteers know what they're signing up for and what the expectations are, because I think well, the election committee is probably the best defined committee because we have an election every year. But some of the other positions are not as well defined. I think you did a great job with the mission statement for the walkability task force. And I think that really helped us, guide us, and we knew what we were doing from the get-go. But I think we need something like that for each of the committees, and that volunteers should have that before they sign up for a committee, because I do think people sign up and think it's going to be one thing, and then it turns into something else. So,
Okay.
but all this other stuff seems like a lot.
You think so? It does seem to, yeah, it does.
seems
It
like
has,
a
did
lot.
multiply over time.
Yeah, I prefer something that was bulleted. I'm also not sure about it's not binding, because to me that seems kind of silly to say these are our guidelines, but they're not binding, so then you have some people following them and other people saying, well, we don't have to do, that's just an idea of what we could do. So I would prefer to see something that was in fact the policy, if we're gonna have something like this. I'm not.
Well, so you would prefer to see something that was a little stricter than guidelines.
Yeah,
Okay.
well.
This is how we do it.
When you, whether you're a student or an employee at a job, when you have a handbook, and I think this was meant to be the volunteer handbook.
Yeah.
It's not like
Yeah.
you can do this if you feel like it,
Mhm.
but
No.
otherwise you can
Yeah.
do whatever you want. And it just seems a little wishy-washy
Yeah.
conversation.
Okay.
I mean, so when I said non-binding, I mean, I felt like the goal of this was to provide like an SOP/roadmap to how to get these things started, how to get a committee process started, and the procedures and so on and so forth. Did I think this was, you know, a law or something that's enforceable? I just thought it was to be helpful to volunteers in the process. So yes, it's binding in the sense that this is how it should be done, but it also shouldn't be intimidating in the sense that if you miss this deadline, as we have with the election committee in terms of appointing members,
Right.
you know, you're not being invited to the ethics committee because of an infraction, you know, so along those lines.
And
But
speaking of which, it looks like George had his hand up. I don't know if you want to ask for
Sure.
his input or Keith's input, since we have all the committee
yeah,
people here. I mean, maybe that would help.
George.
Yeah, so one thing that, kind of one of my takeaways from this is it sounds like there's a couple of different audiences and objectives for parts of this, so it might make sense to break into a couple of smaller pieces where if it is geared around, we want to encourage new residents to sign up and help, you know, kind of make them acquainted with what this is gonna be, which I know we had some new people on the committee this year who had never done a committee before. I think that might be a shorter, smaller, easier to digest thing that just walks through. These are the requirements around what you have to do with committee inbox, email record keeping, things like that. This is the expectation around minutes, and I think you can condense it down a lot, and then you have almost a separate document that is geared around the committee's relationship to the council, like the ordinance process and things like that, where that's a separate thing, and it's a little less intimidating because that's something that might be, you walk through with the council liaison early in the process, or something like that. So it might be worth, I think the content's all valuable for things like that, things like when and how can committees consult with the village attorney, things like that. But I think maybe splitting it into a few documents might help with some of the clarity and might help make it a little easier to really dial in the language based on what audience you're trying to reach.
Go for it, Arthur.
Yeah.
I'm trying, who's gonna volunteer to do that?
Well, according to the
It's a great
guidelines,
one.
the original author and Arthur.
Do chapters.
Okay, well,
Okay,
friends,
so we'll introduce it with amendments to come.
so maybe that's what we'll do. So if someone would like to move to introduce the committee guidelines.
I'll make a motion to
Okay.
introduce.
Katie is
Katie
moving
Howard.
to introduce.
Get the name right for the minute.
Do we have a second? Jeff Blander seconds. All in favor, say aye.
You don't have to.
No, I'm just gonna agree to introduce it.
It's unanimous, Martha, and but that doesn't mean that it's fully supported.
Well
Okay.
said.
So it may come down to, Arthur, the next iteration is 3 bullets.
Yeah,
Welcome, we want you,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
show up
Okay.
for the swearing in.
Financial matters.
Okay, back again. Financial, we're doing well. The one point I make here is that our state revenues are the highest in history, and we're only 9 months through the year. So we actually, it's not the highest in history. We have gotten more money in the first 9 months than we had budgeted for the entire year. And so the state is doing very well. We're doing well. We are starting to spend money down on our capital investments, speed bumps and such, and they'll be continuing in the future. So it's all copacetic.
Excellent. Thank you. Manager's report.
Yeah, so first of all, a quick thing just on what Arthur said. The first reporting deadline for the American Rescue Plan is next Saturday. So I am working to get that fulfilled for those funds, which is a lot of logging into government websites, which is just fun. The walkability report, so what the council sort of talked about is we're going to send out an email to the residents with sort of the maps that show all the improvements, where they're going to go, so that people know in advance what the changes are going to be, and then so that there can be follow-up in there, and then we'll just direct AB Viers to do that work already. There's a couple of other things that I'm going to have them do as well.
Well, Niles, in that, in their report, they mentioned these illuminated stop signs.
Yes.
These, how many are they talking about? 2?
What they really said is where so Paul's whole view, Paul Dorr, who did the report, said, you have, it's really where you think they're most visible. One idea is that stop sign at Chestnut and Thornapple, which is one of the other spots where it's a little bit tougher to see things like that.
Uh-huh.
They're not that expensive doing the illuminated stop signs.
Well, they're $1,200.
It's $1,200 each, but that's half the cost of one of the speed indicator signs. So they're a cheaper option than doing something like that.
Let me,
It's about $3,000.
for residents,
Yeah.
these are stop signs that have LEDs around the circumference.
Yeah.
The intensity varies over the course of the days,
Yeah.
or at night they're not as bright. There's another kind that has a radar on it,
Yeah.
so that it's only on when there's an approaching vehicle, so
Mhm.
that if it's a nuisance to residents, it's dark most of the time except when a vehicle goes
Yeah.
by. They're $6,000
Right.
a piece.
So I was talking on a curve,
Yeah.
to be clear. But I do think that it's where you want them, right? So if we identify locations, a couple at least make sense where there's either a point of issue, where we have an issue, where we think it might do the most good, and some of that is just testing
Testing.
locations.
Right,
So
right.
it's possible. My thought is we could purchase,
Couple.
a couple, and then put them up places, and then see where they do
Good-
best.
good idea,
And then,
good idea.
And then do it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. They do catch the eye.
It's
They do.
remarkable. They just put one up at Chevy Chase Elementary School
Yep.
at the Circle, and I mean,
You see
I
it.
always knew there was a stop sign there, but it really
Right.
stood out. So
So all of that to come, and we'll put it all there. Keith talked about the utility stuff. WSSC is starting its thing down Brookville Road here, although they're actually starting in Section 5. I tried to go over there. I haven't seen how much they've actually done, so I don't know if it's weather related or things like that. In the meantime, we are going to pursue with the traffic group again of doing the sidewalk along Brookville Road. So they are right now working on a concept to present to the state to fix the sidewalk at the same time that they're doing this work. So the traffic group actually has a very good rapport with SHA. And they've talked about on various projects they've worked together on. So they're going to work with that part as well.
Great.
So not just doing the report, but helping out with SHA.
Good.
Speaking of SHA, there was a couple of meetings I attended last week regarding changes to Connecticut Avenue. SHA presented a whole plan, very extensive, to do all kinds of changes, the most drastic of which would be reducing the lanes from 3 to 2, the north-south lanes, and replacing it with a left turn lane, right? So you'd have 2 on the side and then a left turn.
Plus broader sidewalks.
Broader sidewalks,
bicycle lanes,
bike lanes, all of
protected.
these extensive.
This is big.
Right. They solicited public feedback at these meetings. The overwhelming, there wasn't a single person who agreed with reducing it from 3 lanes to 2. So the state is going to look back at their plans, and there might be some adjustments going through. On the flip side, there were no objections to the near-term ideas that they were putting forward, which is to redo the crosswalks along Connecticut Avenue, to repaint things, to redo some of the curbs. So it seems like the state got sort of 2 messages. One is do the little stuff, maybe not do the big stuff. So we'll see where they come back to. They say they're at least 6 or 12 months out before they do any of the big stuff at the very least. So just as an awareness, that all of this is relevant to us just in terms of Brookville Road and questions about they do changes to Connecticut Avenue, how that will impact Brookville Road. And the communities along Connecticut Avenue, the village, the town, Section 3 and Section 5 have all expressed opposition to the state to this plan, and this is one of those situations.
What is their opposition is what?
Well, one is they don't want more traffic on their streets, and what they're concerned about is that if you reduce the traffic and if you encourage people to turn left right? If you're replacing 3 lanes with 2 lanes with a turn lane, you're encouraging people to get off Connecticut Avenue. Where are they going to go? But in their communities. So they are concerned that this will increase traffic on their side streets. So there is a sort of concerns and contentions around some of these changes. Again, the little things, the more, short-term things, there seems to be more of a sense there. This is all to go that where the village feels or how the council feels is something to look at if it gets further down the road and we have, concerns of writing a letter or something like that to SHA. But at the same time, our focus obviously is Brookville Road, but balancing those things as well.
So take a look at their report. It's a good report.
It's
A lot
extensive.
of pictures, a lot of maps.
And so that was in the emails I sent out about their meetings. So.
I just want to,
Yeah.
real quick. So first, I just want to really thank Niles because I've called several times over the course of the week or so, and he's just been incredibly helpful in between those meetings. But also residents who've been very vocal. I know there's a number, but I just want to mention Jean Sperling's name. I mean, she's been really up to date and sharing information. So just want to thank on those issues. The other things I just want to put out there, and Niles, this is more rhetorical, we could always follow up, but there is, my understanding, there was a decision by perhaps Elrich or for the library that it will not be for mixed use, but it would be for solely for redevelopment of the library itself. But then there has been, I think, some contention around this, and so we just need perhaps the next meeting we can have an update. But
certainly
that was a really big contentious issue, I think, going on in terms of what would happen with that library site.
I mean, all of that I think is something that there's a lot of politics around at the county level.
No.
Let's put it that way. And so I think part of that is figuring out where they stand. There is an election coming up in November for the county council, and so I think part of it for our just sense of things is to see where that goes. I think you're right that the latest thing is not as much a mixed use, but more just redeveloping the library. And we'll see how that goes and how that plays. I mean, part of it is related to state funding as well.
Yeah, so I didn't want to. I know there's a lot there, but I just wanted to put that out there. And then finally, again, this is my own edification, but it might be helpful. I really appreciate the idea that we're putting a line item here for the ARP.
Yeah.
But one, I guess 2 quick things is this is showing through March 2022, and I know that there's 2 tranches. Right?
Yeah. This is just this year's funds. So when in doing the budgeting, there's 2 tranches of the American Rescue Funds. One is this year, one is next year. So this year's funds are, for the purposes of how we budget, are for this year. We'll get the second same amount in next year's budget. The way that Arthur and I have discussed in the past about treating this money is sort of treating it as its own thing. It's outside of our regular budget process because we have to treat it special because it's federal funds.
And it's one time. It kind of comes.
It's one time. It comes and goes.
One time.
So this year we'll have this year's amount, and then next year we'll add the next tranche, depending on how much we've spent by then. But that's the other thing. And so therefore we'll have that full amount. We don't have to spend it until 2026. So that's why I think it should be treated separately, because it's not actually within the same budget cycle as our yearly.
It's more
budget.
like a capital account.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So my only point, and again, this is just for follow-up, is so within my work within the federal government, we have this all the time, right? We have different streams of funding coming in. Some are no year limit. Some you have to spend with a certain time. So the only suggestion is, just because this is Greek perhaps to a lot of people, even to myself, of what is this all about, we could come up with like a sentence or 2 that just simply specifies. It doesn't have to be monthly, but somewhere there's just like this amount, and this is coming in now, this is coming in then, and then what is the term limit, and then what would be the bullets
what are
of what it
the
would be
dates?
spent for.
Right.
So it's out there.
The main thing to remember is that you have to earmark the funds by 2024 We have to spend the funds by 2026.
Exact, like
So
that
that's
stuff,
it.
like
Mhm.
maybe a sentence or two, and
Yeah.
again, it could
Okay.
be maybe in the final budget for the
Yeah.
year. Just
Mhm.
so
Good,
it's
good
there.
idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
totally.
Great.
And
Thank you.
also, we had talked about utilities and
Yes.
maybe a return in the newsletter to like a who to call
Yes.
section. As I know, some residents from Taylor Street brought to your attention the potential smell of gas
Yeah.
at the intersection of Taylor and Delfield.
Yeah.
And so I could help you with that,
Certainly.
or I don't
Mhm.
know if you want
So-
a resident reporter. Or,
Yeah.
and but that would be great, I
Mhm.
think, to have that return. Like if you smell gas,
Yeah.
call
Mhm.
Washington Gas. Like because it's got to be in real time.
Yeah, we have some things there. I think we could add it either as a section or as a link, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we can figure out a way to have all of those numbers. Maybe it be a PDF and,
Yeah.
and it will be linked and people can print it off and
I think that
put
would
it
be
next to.
helpful. Yeah.
People don't really have phones anymore in the same way that they used to,
Yeah.
but I was going to say put it next to your phone, but
Right.
you always have your
And
phone
if I can
now.
help you with that, please let me know. And also regarding the newsletter, I don't know if the cons are on, but I did want to thank Oliver Kahn, a young resident, for his very interesting story about Cecilia Cummings and her life. And Cecilia Cummings, a resident, for agreeing to be interviewed, and also to residents Nancy Ferris, who helped with the journalism internship of that, and to Naomi Nyerman, of course, for organizing that. So I just wanted to thank them for that, and also a call in the newsletter. It's to contact me or Naomi about the future stories, and then Niles helps lay them out.
Yeah.
But you do not report them. It's okay.
Yes.
You just lay them out. Okay. All right. Just wanted to mention that. Thank you. And thank you, Oliver.
Anything else on your?
No, I think that's good
Okay.
for now, unless anybody has any other questions.
Okay. All right. Any more? Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Is there gonna be a Hawkeye, light at the post office, where the pedestrian crossing is?
So my recollection is yes. The state had suggested two. I have their slides up, so I'm trying to see. Because they're going to do one at Lenox Street, is where one of the Hawkeye signals is going to be.
What's the
And then-
Hawkeye signal?
It's like the one in, by Magruder's in Chevy Chase, that when you
Oh.
press it, it actually turns red instead of just
Yeah,
flashing
well,
and nobody pays attention.
right.
So it turns red so that you can cross.
Right, okay. Yeah, those
Yeah.
flashers are dangerous,
Oh, I
because
almost
you
had
think
it.
you may be safe and you walk out and nobody's paying
Nobody
attention.
stops.
Yeah, I'm looking for it now, but they did mention at the time doing they were going to put the Hawkeye, I think, there as well.
Okay.
If not, I think that's a good thing to bring up. And so on the 28th or something like that, the municipal leaders are going to meet again with SHA. So the managers, I mean, sorry. So let's see if we can just put that as something to ask as well. If it's not, I'm still trying to find where the other one is. They definitely said they were installing two.
Is that a PDF or? something
Yeah, it's
you
a
can
it's a
share?
PDF, but I'll make it available later.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any more resident comments as we're concluding tonight's meeting? Seeing none. I think it's.
She was just waving. She was
Oh, she was
waving.
waving.
Yeah.
Okay. Would someone like to move to adjourn?
I would love to.
Susan is moving.
Susan.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Arthur seconding. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous. We are
8:54.
adjourned at 8:54.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Good.